The idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I've come to Gorey. Sitting on the east coast of Jersey, it's around 4 miles from the island's capital, St Helier, with the French coast of Normandy around 14 miles away. Gorey is a quaint seaside village today, but during World War II, the Channel Islands were the only part of the British Isles occupied by Nazi troops.
You might see a small slit just above there, and that is actually a machine gun post which the Germans put in during the Second World War.
Life for the villagers was turned upside down.
You couldn't listen to a radio, you couldn't go to a cinema or anything like that. And to see a swastika flying from that castle was dreadful.
And there are still traces of the village's wartime past hidden in homes and gardens.
And I can see there's some sort of giant cogwheel or gear wheel.
That's how they rotated the turret.
It really is in your backyard. There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea. I'm on the east coast of the island of Jersey, and as I look here in front of me, I can see a wide sandy bay stretching almost as far as the eye can see. And the village of Gorey is tucked away behind those trees over there, but I can see the village church standing on the hill. And I can't fail to notice that, a great fortification on a rocky outcrop, looking out across to France.
This village lived on the front line of our nation's defences right up until World War II. But then the coastline and village buildings were adapted for a very different purpose: the German occupation. In the 1800s, Gorey expanded to house a growing fishing community, and life was centred around this street.
This is the old main street of the village. In fact, this was the main road coming through the village to the harbour. The coast road was built later. And here it's lined with lovely old properties. There's a very elegant old house here, built in this lovely Jersey pink granite stone. Oh, there's a date, look, 1820, I think it says. Oh, and look at this, it's an old barn or stables. Look at that huge door there for carts and horses to go in and out. It's perhaps a couple of 100 years old, perhaps even older than that. Most of the buildings, the historic houses I've seen so far are quite individual, quite bespoke, but I've just come across something quite different. A row, a terrace of cottages that look as though they were all built at more or less the same time, in the same sort of style. And this one here looks like it's closest to the original configuration. There's a chimney stack at that end, there was probably one at that end, it's gone now. And also, looking at the roofs, I can see some of them have got an attic story that was never there originally. These were small, compact, single-storey cottages, maybe first half of the 19th century. They're fishermen's cottages.
Oyster fishing became big business, and from the 1800s the village prospered. It also became a popular place for tourists. But in the 20th century, everything would change with the arrival of Hitler's army. Paul Burnell is an expert on Gorey's World War II past.
Paul, when did Hitler and the German army start to turn its attention to the Channel Islands?
Well, as early as 1940, the Germans had just blitzkrieged their way across Europe, captured all of the European countries. They were just literally 14 miles away on the French coast. And there were the Channel Islands, which had been demilitarised because they were of no strategic value to Britain. And they thought, let's just go for it. And then on the 1st of July, 1940, a German aircraft flew over. The German officer got out, pistol in hand, and it was basically, right, you're now under occupation. And they just started flying the troops in, first of all in their hundreds and then eventually in their thousands. People were asked if they wanted to evacuate. Some 23,000 islanders of the 50,000 population put their names down, but I think by the end of it, there's only about 6,500 people actually evacuated from Jersey back to the UK.
I can't imagine that Nazi propaganda would have let this golden opportunity go. I mean, here they are. They've got a toehold on British soil.
Exactly, Ben. They were filming and photographing. I mean, what could Hitler want more than seeing a British body opening the door of a German staff car on British soil?
Today, Gorey Harbour is a haven of tranquility. But back in the early 1940s, it was far from a peaceful place to be for the local residents.
The Germans brought in strict rules that the locals had to abide by. Cameras were confiscated, radios were confiscated, rationing was brought in. A curfew was introduced. From now on, the villagers were going to live very different lives.
One person who remembers those hardships only too well is 95-year-old Dorothy Burton, who was just 13 years old when the Germans arrived.
Dorothy, you were here when the occupation started.
Yes.
Do you remember what happened?
It was quite frightening, really. All the people living on the pier that you can see down there had to get out their houses because it was called military zone, and they had to go and live somewhere else. It was a bit hard, you know.
Were you afraid most of the time, or annoyed, or angry about what was happening?
Yes, but I think we used to get very angry because there was places you couldn't go, and you couldn't listen to a radio, you couldn't go to a cinema or anything like that. There was nothing like that you could do because of the curfew. You know, it meant life was sort of at a standstill in a way.
And this is your identity card?
Yes.
And everyone had to have one of these?
Yes.
You look very determined in this
Yes, I was
picture.
not very happy.
No. Would they ask to see these and
Oh,
check?
yes. Oh, yes.
So at every opportunity, they're reminding you
Yes.
who's in charge.
Oh, yes, definitely.
As I understand it, Dorothy, some people had the opportunity to leave the island
Yes.
and escape.
Yes.
Did you ever get the chance to do that?
To do it, you had to go to an office in town and register to get on the boat. And my dad went to join this queue to register, and he stood in the queue for ages. And they shut the office down when he was about 10 people away, so we stayed.
And we're looking out on the castle here, and the flags are flying today, but it was different back then.
Yes, to see a swastika flying from that castle was dreadful. Hated it.
Mont Orgueil, or Gorey Castle, as it was originally known, played an important part in Germany's defence of Jersey. But the history of this incredible structure predates the Second World War by over 700 years.
What I can see in front of me here, this square tower with the battlements on, that's part of the original 13th century castle. Ignore the larger windows, they were put in later. The tower next to it has these very narrow windows, characteristically medieval. They didn't have a lot of window glass, they just let in a little bit of light. And also, as an archer, you could stand at one of these narrow windows and let loose your arrow as well. So that's probably 15th century, towards the end of the medieval period. But as we move round, we go later and later in time. We've got big openings there for cannon. So we're talking 16th, 17th century as we go round the castle here. An extraordinary defensive structure that's just changed so enormously, all the richer for it.
J.P. Hammond Cole looks after the castle, and he's studied its history and its defensive role over the centuries.
Mont Orgueil, that's a very evocative name, isn't it?
Absolutely. And all it means is Mount Pride in French. And it's a name that was given to the castle in the 1400s, and it's just stayed ever since.
Mount Pride.
Mount Pride.
And there's clearly a lot of pride that went into building this place, because it is a very, very good defensive position, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So it's actually built upon an Iron Age hill fort that was up there. And the reason why they built a hill fort there is because you're surrounded by the sea on three sides. So basically the only way you could attack was from the west. And also because it's on a large bit of granite, then you can't necessarily tunnel under the walls. So it's a very good, strong defensive position. And it kind of sticks out on the east coast as well, so no one can sneak up you from over there in France.
And France is just over there. I mean, we can see it just beyond those rocks there.
Yep, so it's just 14 miles away. That is the Cherbourg Peninsula, which is a part of Normandy, which the islands were a part of before the English lost Normandy in 1204.
So this was the key to Jersey. If this castle held, Jersey held, and the French would be kept at bay.
Pretty much, pretty much.
But there was a period of time when it was pressed into service again in a very, very different era.
Yes, on that tower just there, the northeast outworks, you might see a small slit just above there, and that is actually a machine gun post, which the Germans put in during the Second World War.
Exploring this ancient stronghold further, I can see even more examples of how the Germans adapted and updated the castle for a more modern kind of warfare.
I noticed something really interesting about these medieval and late medieval towers. They've had new concrete tops put on them several hundred years later in World War II. And you can see they've actually tried to disguise these new tops. They've used masonry similar to the medieval masonry, but set in concrete. If I look at this one, they've tried to create a masonry design in it. They've sort of etched in a stonework effect to try and camouflage it. Oh look, there's part of a TV aerial sticking out of one of these windows. But just imagine that as a German telescope, pair of binoculars, or even a machine gun. Ah, let's have a look. Yes, it's open. Oh, look at this. Ha-ha. The concrete floor. Yes, concrete, the stuff of World War II. And I can see how this floor's been put in. The wooden boards that help form the concrete, their marks are still here. And you can see, look, here's the steel, the reinforced steel in the concrete, rusting and just starting to show through. And if I look up here, in each side there is an observation window, a narrow horizontal slot. You don't want to attract attention to yourself, you don't want to become a target, but you want to be able to see round, and you can see all the way round. A fantastic observation point. Oh, and look at this, graffiti. There's some dates here, 1940, and German surnames. Werneck, is that? Wernecker, Walter, Herbert, Wilhelm Sonntag. Well, this is evidence of people, of troops, of a garrison that this castle never wanted or expected.
It wasn't just this impressive medieval castle that the German troops used in their defence of Jersey. The island underwent a massive programme of fortification building. Artillery batteries were built. Anti-tank walls went up. And as local resident Jason Meads is keen to show me, there are still plenty of physical reminders of the German occupation to be found all around the village.
Wow, what a place to live. This is your house here, and you've got this very interesting feature. This looks like it was part of the castle defences here, an old battery.
Correct, the water battery. It's actually the back entrance to the castle. And in the 17th and 18th century, this would have had cannon, and the cannonballs and gunpowder were stored in there. But if you look around, you'll see some newer features from the German occupation.
Oh yes, the telltale concrete additions here. There's some form of little wall there.
That's right, so that was a machine gun post there. And just over here was a French tank turret, believe it or not. When the Germans went through France and captured France in the Second World War, they also captured a load of First World War French tanks. They chopped the turrets off and they used them all over, and one of them was right there.
Ah, so instead of having to make a gun from new, you've got one ready-made, position it here, and it's doing the same job as was done hundreds of years before. It's covering the approach to the harbour.
Exactly right, they had it figured out in those days.
Yeah, amazing.
And Jason has even more to show me.
Oh, split the squeeze.
Right, so come on through.
In his backyard.
Oh,
Go on in.
it's a tunnel.
Go all the way into the end.
Oh, yeah. I think I know where this is heading. Oh, wow. Yeah, I've come into this tiny little chamber.
You're right underneath the turret there.
I can see there's alcoves going off to the side here.
Those would have been for storing the shells for the tank turret.
Yeah, they've literally just tunnelled into the old masonry here. And I can see there's some sort of giant cogwheel or gear wheel.
That's how they rotated the turret.
Whoa, well, there wouldn't have been room for many people in here.
2 or 3 max, I think. It gets a bit hot as well.
Oh, dear me. Yeah, astounding. Just enough to operate the gun.
Correct.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Wow, that is amazing, isn't it? What's it like living with this heritage right in your backyard? It really is in your backyard.
It's an amazing feeling. And so many of my friends, little kids, come round, especially to come round and look at the bunker. They get super excited about it.
Yeah. What a history lesson for them.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And actually, you know, these bunkers are all over the island, which, you know, you could just walk past and not know they were there. I think many of them were buried after the Second World War, actually.
Under Hitler's 5-year control of the Channel Islands, Jersey became an island fortress. And with an increasing number of troops arriving here, the villagers' lives were changed beyond measure.
From Victorian times right up to the Second World War, Jersey was a premier holiday destination, and there were hotels and guest houses all over the island. When war came, of course, the tourists stopped coming. The German occupying forces, though, were here in numbers. Just in this vicinity alone, there were 200 German soldiers, and they needed billets. They needed places to stay. This is the Maison Gorey Hotel, and it was converted into a hotel from 4 terrace houses. It's Victorian, this lovely, lavish architectural detail. But in World War II, it became a place where German troops were billeted. But what's extraordinary is that you've got a German barracks, effectively, right here in the middle of the village, amongst the villagers.
And it wasn't just the streets that the locals had to share with their new, uninvited neighbours. Even the church was taken over.
Climbed up to the top of the village here, to this wonderful prominent site where the village church is, and it looks out over the bay here. Now, if I was looking at a medieval parish church, I would see different architectural styles. I would see something that's maybe grown, bits fallen down, new bits built on in their place. But what I seem to be looking at is a church built in one major or perhaps 2 phases. Look, the same design of windows running all the way down this side here, these tall lancet windows with their pointy heads. The same design above the door and the windows on the tower there, that pointy hood moulding. That's because this church was built in the early 19th century. There was no medieval church here before. The parish churches were some distance away. But as the village grew, the congregation did not want to walk a huge distance to those churches, so they built this, a chapel of ease, right here.
St Martin's may be less than 200 years old, but it's certainly seen some sights, and never more so than during the German occupation in World War II. Renee Morley, Dorothy's younger sister, was 8 years old when Hitler's soldiers arrived.
Do you remember coming to this church here?
Yes, I was baptised here. My father was a church warden, my grandfather before that. Yeah.
And what about the vicar at the time? I've heard he was a pretty extraordinary character and a caring man.
Yes.
Who's here at a very, very peculiar and interesting time.
Yes, it was sad for him. I think the first Sunday he preached, war was declared. And he was here till 1965.
It must have been quite difficult because he would have been here having to listen and help people through these incredibly traumatic and difficult times. But he'd step in to help if he could.
Well, I think so, because you see, he could see that we didn't have any clothes. So he took one of the altar cloths and cut it up. 1/3 then went for me to have a skirt made, because we didn't have any clothes. I didn't have any clothes.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? And there was nothing else you could do to get clothes at that time.
Oh, no, not at the very end of the last year, 18 months. No, definitely not, no.
And do you remember the Germans coming up here for their service?
Oh, yes.
As well?
Sometimes we had to wait outside because they hadn't finished yet.
And so you caught the tail end of their service, presumably?
Yes. Usually they'd finish, but there was the occasion, perhaps the vicar went on a bit long in his sermon, you know, and he went on a bit, and we'd have to wait outside for them to finish.
And what did it feel like as a child to see the German army filing in and out?
We were quite used to them walking. At one time, there was about 4 German soldiers to 1 Jersey person. There were so many here.
Did you communicate with them at all, or say hello, or anything like that?
No, you didn't go and mix with them, definitely not. My mother would have killed me, but they were there, and gradually there was more and more and more.
you just got used to it after, well, you do after a few months, let alone 4 or 5 years, don't you?
What do you think about those years now, looking back? I mean, a terrible thing for a child to have to go through.
No, worse for my parents, because children adapt very quickly. But my parents could see us being hungry and not having any clothes or any shoes. So really, it was worse for the older ones than it was for the children.
There are now only a handful of people alive who, like sisters Dorothy and Renee, can remember wartime Gorey. But everywhere you look here, there are physical reminders of how the Germans used and changed the village. Built in the 1800s, this gun tower, high above Gorey, is one of the finest examples of them all. Local historian Philip Marrett is showing me around.
Whoa, right on the top with a parapet. Oh, and this very important piece of architecture.
So we're looking here at the original cannon mount for the 24-pounder that would have been originally in place here. And then the Germans modified this in World War II with a platform. And we see a flak 38 gun sitting up here, a 2-centimetre anti-aircraft gun.
Isn't that interesting? Because this tower dates back to the early 19th century. It's a Martello tower, built for an anti-shipping gun, basically, wasn't it?
That's right.
But it still has all the qualities that make it useful in the 20th century for aerial warfare, for shooting down aircraft.
That's right.
And of course, it offers fantastic surveillance over the sea, doesn't it?
That's it. So we're kind of 13 miles away from the French coast, and 78 years ago we would have had the American lines here. This would be the Battle of Normandy.
So these German anti-aircraft gunners here have got a grandstand view of the liberation of Europe. They would have seen planes going over, the bombers, the fighters, but they're on the wrong side of it. They're here watching their colleagues being pulverised.
That's right. They're effectively watching the end of the war right in front of them. Opposite to that, we have the islanders here all watching the same battle, thinking we'll be free next.
Yeah.
And it takes some time. So the German battle here will continue down into Brittany and then towards Germany. But the islands aren't liberated till May the 9th, 1945. So it takes a lot of time for the islanders to be liberated.
What a sense of euphoria that must have brought me. 5 long years of living under martial law with the enemy, and suddenly it's all over, it's finished.
Almost a year after the Normandy landings, Jersey was finally liberated. And it's a moment that Dorothy Burton remembers well.
When that day finally came, when liberation finally came, it must have been marvellous, overwhelming.
It was very, very emotional. It did feel wonderful. It's a day in my life I will never, never forget.
Slowly but surely, life started to return to normal for the islanders as they took back their beaches, their streets, and their buildings.
The villagers here at Gorey and across Jersey had to suffer the hardship, the deprivation, the brutality of German occupation. And their victory, their triumph, was to survive, to endure, and to protect this beautiful place for a better future.